alarm features, we have some more goodies that I want to show you in the right-click menu of an alarm and also in the hamburger menu next to the first tab page of your alarm console. Let's take a look at that. First, we're going to take a look at some of the remaining items that are located in the right-click menu of an alarm. So if you right-click on any alarm, you will have this right-click menu where we already saw various things like masking the alarm, taking the ownership, adding comments. There are also options in there that you can discover, like opening several things like an element card or changing the element state. I will now go through a few of the remaining items that I want to highlight. The first one is set an alarm as unread. We've seen before that there are a number of unread alarms that are visible for your user. This is a user setting. It's not what other people have read or unread. It's basically like managing your emails. When an alarm comes in, it is unread. If you select it, it becomes read. You can also take any of the read alarms and mark it again as an unread alarm. This is then stored for your user settings. So if you tomorrow log in again, you will see which ones are new. So very simple. I do have some read and unread alarms. So if I select one, it becomes red. If I right click on it, I can set it again as set alarm as unread, and it becomes bold again. So I can also do that with a multiple selection, of course. If I have a number of them, I can also set the alarms as unread again. So now I have a whole list of alarms I need to read. So you can also select all of them to mark them as read. Read, unread, very simple feature, but I wanted to highlight that. Then we also have that view connectivity. You remember maybe that RCA level was basically defined by a certain connectivity chain that you can configure in the DataMiner system. A connectivity chain is basically linking elements together so that device A is linked to B, to C, to D, so that DataMiner knows if all of them go into alarm, probably the first device in the chain is the most probable root cause. Well, you can actually pull that up at any point in time by right-clicking on the alarm and viewing the connectivity. Remember this drawing where we had the RCA between different elements, and I had a number of alarms that were happening in my system. The bottom one, the 0, is the root cause. But if I want to visualize that, if I don't have this drawing here, and if I want to visualize what is happening or how the connectivity is built up, I can always right-click on the alarm and go for View Connectivity, and it pops up in a pop-up here. I have two connectivity chains, and it's a little bit cramped on this one here, but you can see it's a little bit similar as I had in the visual, where device A is linked to B, to C, etc. I right-clicked on device B, so this one is highlighted in the yellow font. Okay, so if you have that connectivity defined, it is readily available from your alarm console as well. Next thing is just very simple copying. Well, very simple. You do have a couple of different options here, because if you right-click, do you actually want to right-click and copy the cell, the value that you selected on? For instance, let me go back to my system here. If I want to copy the 21 dBm, you can right-click and copy this cell 21 dBm. Or you can select all the visible columns, whatever I see and configured in my view here, it will select and copy all of those properties or columns. Or you can just go for all the properties, all the possible properties that we have on an alarm. Or you can customize it and then you can pick and choose. And you can say like, okay, I need the element name and I need, for instance, the parameter description. And I also need the value, for instance. So you can just pick and choose which ones you want and organize them and copy that so that you can nicely paste it into an Excel or into an email or Word document. Now, instead of copying a cell or all the visible properties or a select number of visible properties, you can also, of course, do a multiple selection to copy those. So if I want to select a number of them, you can copy them as well, of course. But if you want to export the whole list, you can select all of them. But if you want to export that to Excel, and I have Excel open here, there is also the possibility to just take any alarm and start click and dragging it into Excel, and you basically export the whole list. If you drop it in there, you basically exported everything with all the visible columns as you have it in DataMiner Cube. So that's a convenient way of exporting a complete tab page into Excel. Note that, of course, you can also do Ctrl-A, select all of them, and use the copy selected or visible columns and then paste it into Excel. Next to that, you also have the send by SMS if you have a mobile gateway attached to your DataMiner system, being able to send and receive text messages. You can just send off an alarm via a text message. There is also the show and hide side panel. We already discovered that that is the possibility to open up that side panel on the right hand side. Note it is indicated also this is a user setting, the double click action of an alarm. If you double click on an alarm, what do you want to happen? Do you want the side panel to open and close, or do you immediately want to open up the card with more details on that element, that parameter? That's a user setting. You can play around with that. The default is opening up the elements drilled down into the parameter. Now, you can also actually customize the right-click menu of an alarm, meaning that as an administrator, I can extend the menu with additional items. We do see here some of the possibilities indicated in red. Normally, on a default system, there would be nothing in this section and you would just have view connectivity and then the needed actions, nothing in between here. But you can do so by configuring that in the hyperlinks XML. In the hyperlinks XML, there's some more information in the help. You can say like, okay, I want to immediately have certain actions available in the right-click menu. What can you do? Well, you can add, first of all, a hyperlink. A hyperlink to a website could be a fixed one, just opening an internal net website, or in this case, we have one to Skyline. So if you have some internal trouble ticketing system, you can just right-click, open it up there. But with a trouble ticketing system, you might want to immediately add as an argument in the URL the trouble ticket ID that you want to show. And remember that we can add those custom properties in the alarms with the trouble ticket ID. So I can immediately take that property of the alarm and use it to build a more dynamic URL that opens up the correct web page. So it's not only a fixed item that I can put in there, but you can also compose it with various items from your alarm property. And I do have an example on this in our demo DMA here. If I search for an alarm on our TRS Microsoft Server 01, yeah, there we have it. You will notice if we go to, well, actually, if we go to the properties of the elements, let me quickly show that to you. There is a property called latitude and longitude. So this element actually got a position onto the GPS locations or Google Maps, and now the alarm just disappeared in front of me. And here is Microsoft Server. We still have another one. So if I right-click on the alarm and I go to hyperlinks, you will see that it composes a Google Maps with the coordinates that are specified in the element properties. So you can take element properties or service or view properties or alarm properties to dynamically build an URL. And if you open that up, it will immediately load that web page with the necessary arguments indicating that here my server is located next to Skyline in this building here. So that's immediately showing that in a new tab page. So a hyperlink can be composed, and the next thing I can do is just executing an executable. An executable could be something that, well, it needs to be installed on the client machine because we are working on the client. But you can launch, for instance, a ping or a telnet or an RDP or maybe some other application that is immediately doing certain things that you want to have readily available at hand. If I launch a ping or telnet or RDP session, I will of course use the polling IP address to immediately give that as an argument to the executable so that it launches the correct ping or telnet or remote desktop. Next to that, I can also take it a step further and launch an interactive automation script. I can immediately from an alarm start an automation script that will be interacting with me to further maybe ask me some additional information. And I have an example on that in our system here. So if I right click on the alarm that we used before for the hyperlinking, I do have the possibility to go to tickets, more, and or here create tickets. Creating a ticket, and it launches an interactive automation script. And you will see like, okay, you want to create a ticket. It has a certain ID. That's the element name. It is the commit charge total that has a large value. I can add some additional comments. I can specify a priority, and I can dispatch a head-end or a field or a NOC engineer. So it basically needs some more information that I need to populate here before it is able to go to another ticketing system and automatically create a ticket for me. If I click create ticket, it will talk to the ticketing system, create that trouble ticket in there, and it comes back with a unique reference from the other system. And I can just OK that. Because what happens is alarm tickets, it is not being shown in the alarm ticket. Let me take a quick look if the alarm property is maybe the trouble ticket ID. No. I'm not sure anymore which one it is. One of those properties will automatically then also be populated with that trouble ticket ID. Believe it or not. So it takes back that information, stores it into the trouble ticket ID. Now, what I do want to mention also is next to those additional right-click menus that I can specify in the hyperlinks XML, it is also possible that certain parameters of certain protocols immediately have that available native from the driver. So we do have the possibility in a driver to immediately leverage those additional right-click menus as well. But typically, that's the most important ones are the ones that you can configure in your system. You can go for a hyperlink, fixed or dynamic, an executable with dynamic arguments, and interactive automation scripts, even taking it a step further. So that's the right-click menu. So now let's take a look at the hamburger menu. So the right-click menu, we now covered all of that. The hamburger menu is located next to the first tab page of your alarm console, which is by default the active alarms. If you click on that hamburger page, hamburger icon, you will see a number of options again to activate or deactivate certain features. The first one is automatically remove cleared alarms. I've played with that before. By default, if an alarm, let me take a look where the alarm is, IRD01. It is currently an alarm. If I remove the alarm, it will automatically disappear from my UI. If you want to avoid that, you can say, I want to disable that automatically remove. And if an alarm now pops up and it disappears again a few seconds later, the alarm will stay in my system forever as a green alarm. And I need to specifically right-click on the alarm and say remove all the cleared ones or the selected cleared one, for instance. So if you would disable again, or if you would enable again to automatically remove, it would also remove all of them, and no longer that feature would be applicable, of course. So removing the cleared or disabling the auto clear is a little bit like the clearable alarms, because if an alarm only happens for a few seconds and it disappears again, it will stay in my alarm console forever. So also maybe if I'm going for a coffee and I get back to my desk, I will see that a number of green alarms are maybe there. Then I know while I was getting my coffee, there were some alarms that shortly came up and disappeared again. So you can easily remove them again by right-clicking and removing all of the cleared alarms or the selected ones. A special case is the information events. Just as a brief side note, an information event that is basically not activated there, because an information event is not really open or cleared. It just is always cleared. It's immediately gone. So if I would activate this option on here, it would be an empty list. So typically I don't activate it here. But then I could say like, yeah, if I leave my interface open for days, this would fill up with a very long list of information events. True, but we've set a limit to that so that it only shows you the last 1000 information events. If there are more, it will remove the oldest ones. Okay, so that was the remove cleared alarms. Next one I want to briefly mention is the history tracking and correlation tracking. By default, those are activated, and that's actually working quite well. What happens if I disable the history tracking? Well, instead of having the double icons for alarms with a life cycle, it would all show them as individual records, and you would see them in a gray or italic lighter gray font, that they are actually not current anymore and that it's been replaced by a newer alarm. Typically, you don't really want to do that for the active alarms, but that could come in handy when you are investigating history alarms. Because with history alarms, they would all be collapsed, the full life cycle of an alarm, with only green records if all the problems are fixed already. So you would have all green alarms and you would not see the criticals if you're not opening it up. So that's why history tab pages might come in handy without this option, but here it is good as it is. Correlation tracking, that's for the correlated alarms that you can open up and see the raw alarms. So by default, raw alarms are underneath a correlated alarm. Unless you disable this option, then you will have the correlated alarm and next to it the raw alarms as well. Okay. The next thing that I want to mention is on the automatically removed alarms. Let me show you how that works because the merging is related to that. So let me disable this again. I generate an alarm and I clear an alarm again. So the alarm remains there. If I generate again an alarm and I clear again an alarm, I should have said if I generate an alarm again, there is again a new record. So each time the alarm toggles and goes back in and out of alarm, a new record is being added to my alarm console. Well, you can actually avoid that by activating the merge alarm trees. If you activate this merge alarm trees, you can say merge all the alarm trees of the same element and parameter. And you can optionally also specify a time window. So if it happens within 15 minutes range, you can say it's still related to each other. If it happens the next day, then it's not related to each other. But I'll just do it always. And now you will see that I have again one record for my IRD01. Yeah, be aware the one with the curly braces, that's a virtual element following this element, so don't worry about that one. So you can see that the alarm, it went into alarm, out of alarm, in alarm, out alarm, in alarm. So you have one history life cycle now. That is the merging that you can activate on the alarm tree. And that is, of course, only applicable if you disable your automatic removal of cleared alarms. And history tracking is enabled. Now, text-to-speech, let's play around with that one. So you can activate a text-to-speech. And what I do want to mention also, let me remove that one as well in the meantime. What I do want to mention, these options that I activate or deactivate here in the hamburger menu, they are applicable to this tab page. So it is possible to activate the text-to-speech on a specific alarm tab page that is, for instance, only showing critical alarms of site 1 or critical alarms of site 2. So you can activate it on all the alarms, but also on a filtered sub-page. We will add additional tab pages later on with filtering. I'll just now activate it on my full alarm tab page with all the alarms of my complete system. If I clear it again and if I turn my audio of my computer on and I generate an alarm again.
There's a critical alarm on element IRD01.
There it is.
Parameter output gain.
So you can nicely hear that it reads out the name of the device, the parameter, it's a critical alarm, the value, that's all nicely read out. So that's the text-to-speech that you can enable on a specific alarm tab page. Note, we will immediately see there is also just an audible alert, like a ting or a WAV file or some music you can play when an alarm enters. If too many alarms are entering, it will also say like, yeah, too many alarms entered, please check your alarm console. The next one is freeze. Sometimes that might come in handy when you have a very active system and a lot of alarms are coming in and continuously it's shaking and it's moving and you can hardly select the correct alarm. You can freeze the alarm console. It will buffer all the incoming updates while you freeze your alarm console. So now you can select and do whatever you need to do as manipulations. And if you unfreeze again, it will immediately process all the updates and give you back an up-to-date view on the actual alarm state. It's clearly indicated again with the blue background and the frozen in the header that you are not looking at all your active alarms newly updated, but a frozen one. Then there is some visual things you can activate or deactivate. The first thing is show alarm duration indicator. Let's play around with that. It is actually activated by default, this one, and that's in the time column. You do have like an indication in the alarm color. It's like a small, only a couple of letters. Why is that? Well, actually, if you would scroll down, we have very old alarms in our system. So let me use the scroll bar here. You will see that it actually gets wider and it's actually a little bit like a progress bar that is indicating how long the alarm is active in my DataMiner system. So that is the alarm alarm duration indicator that is being shown. If I disable that, it's removed, but by default it is enabled. You can also activate the full alarm color coding. So if you want to have a little bit more visual indication of the alarm, you can enable that full alarm color coding. Then it's really clear when it is a warning, minor, major, or critical. And you can combine and play with both options, of course. So that's to make it a little bit more visual, your alarm severity. Now that's a fun one as well, the automatically group according to the arrangement. By default, your alarm console has this activated. And if I go back, let me hide the side panel for a moment. When I go back to the top, you will see that it automatically groups on today 32 alarms, yesterday, last week, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, etc., etc. So that's automatically grouping on the time because it is sorted on the time. Note there is also this expand or collapse button in the tab to automatically do it for all the items in one go. Now it is grouped on the time because it's sorted on the time. If I would group or if I would sort on the element name, it would automatically group on there as well. And I would see how many alarms there are per element, or I can group on parameter. Let me collapse. Then I would see that certain might be more popular. Or I can also, for instance, sort on severity. Let me go back to the top. Then I can immediately see if I collapse or collapse everything, that I have, for instance, 19 critical alarms. I can take a look at it. I have some majors, I have one notice alarm, and I have some timeout alarm. So I have those various grouped nicely together. Now you can disable this option by disabling here the automatically grouped according to arrangements. And then I don't no longer have that grouping. So if I sort back to the default time, there is no grouping. But if you disable the automatic grouping, you can actually group yourself by any of the columns that you have available, simply by right-clicking, for instance, on the severity, and then say group by this field. And now I will see all my timeouts and criticals, etc. together. And now I can also maybe group on time, because I can now actually do multi-level grouping. And I can see that within the timeouts or within the criticals, that today 5 of them occurred, last week 4, 3 weeks ago 1. So you can actually have multi-level grouping, allowing you to kind of like drill down into your alarms and have it nicely organized by different hierarchical layers, you could say. I've now done it with the time and the severity. You could also involve the owner, for instance, so that you can, let me disable again the grouping on the timing and the severity, and for instance, do it on group by owner. So I can see the people that already took ownership. So I have all my unacknowledged alarms here. If I take ownership on that one, my name would also be added in there. So I have already 4 people doing some work here. Then I can, of course, then also filter on again another field like the severity. And also remember that you can add other columns there as well, like, for instance, the class gold, silver, bronze. So the gold, silver, bronze might also be a quite useful one to group on. So you can use your imagination and you can use any of the properties on the alarms to do the grouping and the multi-level grouping. So remember, I've now done it manually. If you want to go back, you need to activate the automatically group according to arrangement. And if I sort again on today, you will have, on time, you will have your today again. Okay, so that was grouping of alarms, nice feature. Then we also have the delay and the refresh rates. Those are a little bit more for an operator using the alarm console on a daily basis and might be annoyed, for instance, by certain situations like an alarm popping up, you wanting to take action, and by the time you take action, the alarm disappears already again. It was only there for maybe 10 seconds. You hardly had the time to do something, and then it disappeared. And typically they say like, yeah, but that can happen. You don't worry about those alarms that only pop up for 10 seconds. Whenever it's more like, let's say, more than 30 seconds, then you can take action. Yeah, but then I continuously have to look at all those alarms that are only happening for a few seconds. And I need to check my clock, things like that. Well, actually, you can embed this procedure into your DataMiner system by activating the delay option. If you activate the delay option, you will get this window and you can delay the incoming alarms for a certain amount of time, like in this case, 30 seconds. So if an alarm pops up in the DataMiner system, let me show that with an example. Let's delay our alarm console for 30, or let's say for 5 seconds. 5 seconds. Apply. So whenever, let me clear the alarm first. Whenever an alarm pops up, I don't see it, and it automatically clears again after a few seconds. I've never seen it. Nothing happened to my alarm console because it only popped up for a few seconds. If the alarm pops up again, and now I will leave it in there, it's about taking 5 seconds. So I'm expecting it right about now. So there is a delay of 5 seconds before it shows you the alarm in the alarm console. So whenever it pops up, you know, it has already been there for a number of seconds, so I can immediately take action because it's not likely to going to disappear again so fast. But if in that 5 seconds it clears again, I was never bothered. I don't worry about it. I can just continue my work uninterrupted. That's a delay. Delaying, buffering a little bit those incoming alarms before showing it in the UI. It's a user setting on my UI that I do. You can, of course, use the group settings to apply that to a number of people. The next option indicated here is the refresh rate. The refresh rate is not really about buffering, but it's about more updating your UI, your list of alarms on a more frequently basis, because normally by default, it is continuously updating. And if you have a very active system, you could have multiple alarm updates within a single second. So you could have continuously like updates, and it's like the thing is like alive and continuously moving, and you kind of like you get like stress from it. So you can actually fix that problem by activating a refresh rate. A refresh rate, you're typically not going to specify something like 30 seconds, but more like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 or 5 seconds. And then what will happen is every couple of seconds or every second, it will update the alarm console with the new information. So whenever an update is there, it will potentially take maybe a second before it gets there, or maybe immediately if it's just before the refresh rate. It depends on when the alarm pops up, but it might come in handy on certain systems. So if I quickly show that the refresh rate, so it's still delayed. Let me deactivate my delay. Okay, the delayed, it will show the alarms that were still in the buffer. And if I specify a refresh rate, let me show of 3 seconds, apply. So every 3 seconds, it will update. So whenever an alarm pops up or an alarm disappears, it might take 3 seconds. Now it was like only 1 second you could see. And now maybe, yeah, it's also maybe 1 second. So it depends a little bit on when in the refresh rate it is being updated. Not really an active system here, but if it's really like alive, you could really use that feature to make it a little bit more slower, you could say, in updates. The last items that I want to mention in the feature overview is the following. The first one is the show and banner. Maybe sometimes your alarm console is more closed and you're more working on the visuals and you want to be aware of new alarms that are entering in your system. Well, you can activate the show and banner to actually, next to your username, immediately have an indication of the new alarms, together also with one alarm impacting 2 services. So all the new alarms that are entering are immediately being shown in the banner. There is also a user setting that you can make it a little bit more compact. Instead of reading it or spelling it out with one new alarm and one alarm impacting two services, you can just have like a very minimal, like one with the most severe alarm state next to that. So show in banner to make it visual that new alarms are happening there. The statistical view and the reports view, we already saw that. That's the same as in the blue bar at the bottom. The statistical view and the reports view, so those were the different views. You can change them and go in here as well to the statistical or the reports view. That's the same thing. We already discussed that. Same for the show and hide the side panel. We already saw that it's available in the right-click menu, the show and hide side panel over here. So I can also over here disable that again. More interesting is the next one, the Audible alert. We saw that you can activate a text-to-speech on your alarm console, so that whenever an alarm enters into that tab page, we're still working on the settings within the selected tab page, that it was like a text-to-speech reading out your alarm details. You can also select something audible that you hear whenever something is entering. Let's activate that. Let's go for Audible alert. Typically, you might want to do that on something like critical alarms only, or maybe have it for separate sites. So I enable the Audible alerts, and then you need to select a audio file from the drop down. If there is no audio file yet, you can add a new audio file. And you can typically find some audio files in your C Windows Media directory. In the C/Windows/Media, you do have underneath there some Audible WAV files there. So if you select one of those files, I already selected one before, the alarm 01, you can actually play it. Yeah, my audio wasn't still down in volume. You have some options whether it needs to repeat that WAV file and maybe stop playing after a number of seconds, or stop playing when all the alarms are acknowledged or when they are read. So whenever you acknowledge or mark it as read, it stops the playing as well. Let me pop up again. Did I now activate that? I guess so. Let's generate an alarm and let's see if I will hear something. So first I'll clear my alarm again, and then I'll activate it again.
There's a critical alarm on element IRD01.
Okay, my text-to-speech is still on. Let's now activate the Audible alarm. Okay, and now indeed I have the icon there. So it was still my text-to-speech that was activated. Now I deactivate it, and now it's just gonna play some music. Of course, you can select any WAV file or audio file that is supported here. I'll turn my volume down so we're not bothered about that anymore. Okay, last one that I want to mention here is the default alarm list. The default alarm list, that is the one that will be selected when you open up your DataMiner Cube in the morning or in the afternoon. So if you add other tab pages, or maybe the masks you find it more interesting, or you add a tab page with, for instance, critical alarms, you can define this one as the default tab page. Normally that's the active alarms, that is the default, but you can choose another one. And basically when you log out and you sign back in the next morning or the next session, you will have that tab page as the default one. That's the one you should focus on. That's the most important one. All right, so those were a ton of features that are available. So basically we took a closer look at the right click menu where we had things like copying an alarm details or just dragging and dropping it into Excel. We do have also the possibility in the hamburger menu to activate certain options, more visual things in your tab page, like the background color coding or how it behaves, your alarm list. And remember, those hamburger menu options, that's what you have in that specific tab page. You could have multiple tab page. One tab page maybe has the text-to-speech enabled. Another tab page with critical alarms maybe has some audible alerts that is playing whenever something is happening in there. So you can really configure all of those settings on an individual basis of the tab pages there. So I think that was quite a lot of useful information in the alarm features. Let's now also then take a look on how to add some custom tab pages to the alarm console.